We would like to thank our funders. If we did not have these generous grant programs that are out there to help us host important events like this, then we would be in trouble without without being able to bring this kind of programming to you. This grant is from the Northeast Extension Risk Management, which is through the United States Department of Agriculture. So we're very grateful for this program, this grant program that runs, and Farm Credit, Mid-Atlantic, and Ag Choice Farm Credit for allowing Heather to join us and give us the information that she's going to share. And with that, we'll introduce Heather. Heather is an ag business consultant with Ag Choice Farm Credit. She has been with Farm Credit since 2016 and has worked with over 180 farm businesses to finance operating and long-term capital needs. Prior to joining Farm Credit, Heather worked for Penn State Extension teaching farm business management. She holds an MS from Virginia Tech in ag economics and a BS in dairy science. Heather also has experience in agricultural development, serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador, and she continues to volunteer with the USAID Farmer to Farmer program, teaching financial literacy around the world. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Heather.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to Pennsylvania Farm Link for allowing me to be with you all today. Like Michelle mentioned, my name is Heather Weeks, and I work with Farm Credit here in Pennsylvania to help farmers. I work with farmers across the Mid-Atlantic region, primarily in Pennsylvania, to help them with their finances, with their farm transition plans, budgeting, record keeping, goal setting, all sorts of different things. And when we encounter farms in those settings, we know that that comes with a lot of stress, and just day-to-day decision making on farms can be really stressful. So we're going to walk through some areas of that today and try to give you some tools, resources, and talk about some options that you have as we go through that. So the Secretary of Agriculture for Pennsylvania, Russell Redding, spoke at a roundtable a few weeks back with the Center for Dairy Excellence and some folks from the Department of Ag and Penn State Extension about stress and mental health in agriculture. And one of the things that he said that really struck me was, in ag and on farm, stress is the baseline, and it's how we manifest it that really determines how we react to it, how we relate to what's going on around us, and the actions that we take from it. And that really struck me because, in a sense, he was acknowledging that every single person that's involved in agriculture, and especially those that are on farms day to day, are operating with some sort of low level or even moderate to chronic stress that they're working under on a regular basis. And it's really important to acknowledge that fact and work through it and understand that we all have that here and we're not alone. When we have financial stress on the farm, that can directly relate to physical stress. And that can manifest itself in heart disease. It can manifest itself in hypertension, even leading to stroke and other chronic diseases such as diabetes. It can then lead to other mental and emotional factors such as depression, substance abuse, and thoughts and actions of suicide. We can directly relate some of these underlying financial stressors to both physical and mental issues that we have. When we talk about the causes of financial stress, I mean, it can really be anything, right? We have all sorts of things that are going on the farm. And one of the things that make agriculture so different from any other types of financial stress that we might have, because every single one of us has financial stress in our lives. Whether you're an entrepreneur, what happens when you're on a farm is that there is often no escaping that farm business. So let's say that you run a pizza shop or you're an auto mechanic and you're an entrepreneur in that sense. Oftentimes you can physically leave that space and go home at night. When you're on a farm, your farm is off your home as well. And so there is no leaving that space. There's no separation there. And you're often getting calls at all hours to go and deal with some type of an emergency. And so you really have no separation there between your work life and your home life. And then oftentimes the finances on a farm are intertwined again. There's often no direct separation in the farm finances. And even if we do have separate entities for the operating assets and we're operating under an LLC or a corporation, there's still many times when we are shifting some of those expenses, and those draws can get a little blurry under what is a personal expense, what is a farm expense. You know, those utility bills and all of that are often all intermingled. We're really shouldering a lot of that business stress just throughout our lives, throughout that day to day. And so when we're talking about what can cause financial stress in particular, that can come from all sides of our financial picture. So if you're thinking about what we have on a farm, you're thinking about the different financial statements that we are incorporating into the business. You're looking at increased input costs. Currently, that's a very major one. You're looking at decreased prices. So we're looking at it both on the expense side and on the income side. Sometimes those are happening independently. Sometimes those are happening all at once. And right now in the dairy industry, we're fortunate to have very high prices, but we also have high input costs. So while we might have opportunities for a lot of income, we're also having to balance that with how do we manage our expenses. On the flip side, if you have a time when we have decreased prices, then we're dealing with situations when we just don't have enough money in the checkbook and we have to be making every little bit stretch. We might have a situation where we have high debt payments. We know that agriculture is a very capital intensive industry. There's a lot of investment that goes into a lot of the equipment that we use, a lot of the investment into our buildings and the infrastructure that we have in agriculture. And just getting into the industry requires a high barrier to entry with permitting and getting the right registrations. And it's very important that it takes a lot of work to get into the industry. And oftentimes that means debt, investment, and having to manage all of that as well. And so having to look at, okay, who gets paid this month? Where do we take that limited check, as it were, and how are we going to split that out, especially if we're working in a seasonal business and we are not sure when our next check is going to come in, or if it only comes a couple of times a year. We have to be able to make sure that we are budgeting, stretching those payments out so that we have the income when we need to be making those payments. To go along with that, we have low working capital. Working capital is that liquidity, that ability to make payments as they come due, have cash on hand for unexpected items as well. So it's not enough to simply say, I have the current funds in my checkbook to make those payments that I know are coming up. It's to make that payment if a tractor breaks down, if a skid loader blows up, if we have some unexpected occurrence that might cost $2,000, $4,000, a couple $100 here and there. But if we are so limited because we have stretched that check, that income right down to the penny, something like that really could break us when we have other stressors going on as well. And then we all know that farming is uncertain. We deal with weather all of the time. We deal with uncertainty in markets. And so uncertainty when we're putting together our budgeting, not knowing what we're going to be paid for our products, and then not knowing what the market do down the road is very hard to predict. And so one of the things that we can work on is getting a better idea of what are the contracts that are out there? How can we have a better grasp of ensuring our income, or making sure that we know when we're going to be paid, if we're working with vendors, ensuring that we are getting paid on time, and making sure that we don't have all our eggs in one basket, that we're not reliant on one large vendor or one large buyer in that marketplace. I'm sure if you can think of others out there, I'd love to hear them. Covered a lot in general, but I know there's a lot specifically that go on that cause financial stress on the farm. So if you have any other ideas, feel free to put them in the chat. We can address them directly if you have ideas or ways that you know of that can help mitigate some of these causes of financial stress. What are some of the results of stress, and how does that impact us when we are directly working with the farm business? Well, ultimately, it starts with poor decision making, and that can be a little bit on the input side. I heard a lot from farmers this year that said input costs are high. Fertilizer is really expensive. I'm just not going to put any fertilizer out on my crops this year. That might be an indicator of stress and poor decision making, because we did not go through the numbers. We did not understand what could we invest in this year, and not thinking down the road at investing now really would ensure that we have a crop later this year, and being able to put some insurance measures in place, contracting out on that crop to know that we are locking in a profit. There's a lot of things we can do even when we have extremely high fertilizer prices, and still ensure that we are going to get a profit from that in the market that we are in. When we have poor decision making, we can start to look at the bills that we have to pay, and we can think, okay, I really need to get this bill paid off because they are my brother-in-law and I really need to pay them back. And that might feel really important to us, but the credit card company has a 26% interest rate, and they are going to let everyone else know if we didn't make our credit card bill this month, and they are also going to charge us a very high interest rate on that. So not only will it hurt our credit score, we're going to have a very big interest payment due if we don't pay our credit card. We might need to have a tough conversation with our brother-in-law and say, hey man, I know we owe you some money right now. Things are pretty stressful. I've allocated that to the credit card this month. We start to have that inability to not even allocate, but just be able to not be able to pay our bills at all. That's when we start to increase our vendor debt, when some of those invoices that might not be having those finance charges in the beginning start to put a finance charge on it, and they start to run out. So whether that's with the local supplier, seed dealer, vet, some of those places start to add up, and we start to get behind, and it becomes harder for us to address the issue, for us to acknowledge it, and for us to begin to work out of those areas. And it just becomes harder for us to understand where we're at and take a deep breath and start to attack the problem. We can start to add up that increased operating and term debt. We can start to take some of that short-term debt when we couldn't pay our bills and shift it to long-term debt. And what that can mean is that we're now paying for expenses that are supposed to be incurred within the year, inputs that we would use towards this year's crop, and therefore are getting expensed out this year. And then the income that we come from selling that crop, whether that's seasonal items, cash crops, greenhouse business, produce, market livestock like beef, any of those things, the income that we come in from selling those crops, should go towards paying back for the expenses that we had into raising them. And if we get behind on some of our bills, what can happen is those expenses, we can start to pay them off over time, and it can take 3, 4, 5 years to pay those expenses. So what happens is if we get behind this year and we start to pay it off, and it's going to take us 5 years to pay it off, down the road in 2027, I'm still going to be paying off expenses for my 2022 crop year. And I'm going to get behind on that. And it's going to be even harder for me to dig out. Those losses start to erode our equity. So the equity that we've built up in the farm, all the years that we've had profits, if we happen to have 1 bad year, 2 bad years, it happens. Farming is unpredictable. It's very volatile. If we're watching it and we're making changes, it happens. But as we start to have multiple years of losses, it can start to erode our equity. And the longer we go on like that, the more risk we get into, that if we were to liquidate and sell the farm, then we end up with less left over at the end with which to invest and have other options for. It's all about what happens and the options that we have. And when we recognize that we're having challenges, the earlier that we address our problems, the more options that we have, to take and can get out of those problems. As we start to erode our equity, the fewer options that we have ultimately at the end of it. So how do we manage some of this, and what are some things that we can do as we're going through our day-to-day work that we can start to make sense of all these finances, start to get a handle on what's going on the farm, and take some actions that can make sure that we are setting ourselves up to prevent some of this stress, because a lot of this can be prevented, and also be able to manage it when it does show up. Because as Secretary Redding said, stress is our baseline. How can we make sure that we're minimizing the effects of that? The first thing is to be honest with yourself. And so for me, I know that when I am struggling, or I know that I have maybe spent too much money in 1 month, I just don't want to look at my credit card statement. And I know that I can't do that because I have to be able to address it and understand where it's coming from. And one of my favorite people to follow is Tiffany Aliche. She is the budgetnista, and she has books on personal finance and investing. And she says that you have to forgive yourself, because if you're carrying around shame of financial stress, financial performance, that means you're shielding yourself from whatever solution that you have. So the first step is to really be honest with yourself, acknowledge that you need some help with getting your finances in order. Maybe you need some help figuring out your budget. Maybe you know that things are probably okay, but you just don't know exactly what you need to be looking for to spot a problem when it happens. And so being honest with yourself and understanding that you do have the tools that you can take to make changes is really the first step there. So let's start with managing our financials. And the first thing is understanding your current financial situation. Sit down and get to know your finances. So I talk to people all the time, and they ask me, what's the best software to use when you are managing your finances? And for me, the tool really doesn't matter. It can be an excellent farm record book. It can be QuickBooks. It can be some of the fanciest accounting software out there. It can be an Excel spreadsheet. And all I want is that you are actually doing the work, putting the numbers into whichever tool works best for you, and then reviewing it and keeping it up to date. Because if you are trying to use a piece of software that you don't quite understand or just doesn't work for your lifestyle, it's never going to work for you. If the best method for you is putting your expenses into a notebook, then that's great. Put your expenses into a notebook, and then work with a tax accountant or a record preparer who can take that notebook once a week, once a month, and enter it into the computer system for you, because you don't need to be adding all that stuff up by hand. you can contract with a professional to do that for you. But you do need to know what your numbers say. You do need to understand your current situation and definitely talk to people for help. So talk with folks that can help you interpret those statements. There's a lot of financial statements out there, and just like we have nutritionists help you understand your diets for your dairy cattle, just like we have agronomists help you with your programs for your crops, just like you have all sorts of folks from the extension programs helping you with IPM and pest management. It's really okay to understand that you have strengths, and maybe the accounting side of it is not where you want to be spending your time. And so it is definitely okay to contract that out to a third party, help you understand what you're doing, and get in touch with exactly what you need to be looking at. And then start to look at what you can control. What can we control on the farm? What areas do we have impact on? What aspects of the income side can we control, and what aspects of the expense side can we control? So that might be things like, how can we be talking with our vendors and talking with our buyers to make sure that our accounts receivable days aren't getting too long? That might be talking with some folks on our expense side to see if we can price some of our inputs ahead of schedule and know that we can put that into our budget so that we can understand what our costs are going to be for next year, and then look at what types of insurance and risk management options we have out there today, because there's a lot available to help us put floors under our prices, to ensure revenue, and to make sure that we have a safety net there for our enterprises when we do have some of those disasters that we might not truly be able to control at the farm gate, whether that's weather, whether that's supply chain disruption. Those are the types of things we are looking to ensure when we talk about insurance and risk management options. So when we understand what we're doing, when we understand where our financial situation is currently, we can start to put that into a budget. And I love budgeting. It sounds crazy, but I want to look at some budgets for the farm, for your business, that can be realistic, that can keep you accountable, and that give you a good place for you to start from if you haven't been budgeting before, or give you the ability to adjust and get to the place where you need to be. So budgets should not be overly ambitious. They shouldn't say we're going to grow our sales by 200% this year. They should not say that we are going to cut our costs by 40%. They should be realistic. They should not be overly conservative either. We try to be pretty even keel, you know. You can talk with some of my colleagues at Farm Credit and say, if we are staying pretty even, if we know our history, we can be fairly even on what we expect and be realistic, and understand what assumptions you are making. When you're talking about your budget, you want to communicate to the folks that are making decisions on the farm. So you're sitting here as a representative from your family's operation, and there's probably, unless you are a one-person show and it's just you doing your thing out there, you've got a whole lot of other people that are making decisions day to day, and you need to communicate to them as you are all sitting down and doing this budget. What are the expectations? What do we need to accomplish? What are our goals, and how are we going to achieve that? Because if we've made a budget and our partner comes in tomorrow and has just bought a $25,000 tractor, this budget is not going to work if we didn't plan for that. It's good to use history as a starting point, because that gives us an idea of what we have been doing, but it's important to keep in mind what we are planning to do from here on out. And like that tractor example, don't forget your capital expenses, because we do know that farms are buying capital expenses. They're one of the most frequently neglected things in a budget. When we talk with farms and we say, well, what are you buying this year? They'll say, oh, I don't have anything in mind. And when we get to the end of the year, it's $80,000 on new equipment, or they've made $40,000 of new upgrades, whether that's adjusting the concrete, adding in new gravel, whatever it is. Anything that you would be depreciating on your taxes, that's a capital expense. Anything over that $3,000 to $5,000 mark, depending on the size of your business. We want you to be looking at this budget throughout the year. It's not one of those things that you just do, throw in a jar, say, hey, I did it, my homework is done. You want to review that budget and compare it back to how you are actually doing. So a monthly budget, a budget that breaks down what you expect to earn and by each month, is an awesome way to do it. Depending on how seasonal your business is, this might be really important. You might not have any income for the first 3 to 4 months of the year, and then you might have a whole slug of income right in the middle part of the year, or you might have no income until the second half of the year. It's just going to depend. Adjust to. If you get to the middle, you find out, hey, I really miscalculated, make that adjustment and figure out what actions you need to take on that management side to bring your budget in line. Don't just say, hey, we're off the rails and we're just going to let it go. We need to readjust to get back in line there. And we have to understand, depending on the time when we're making our budget, we need to think back to what is the norm. So in my specialized world of dairy, we are in times of very high milk prices. The last time we saw these milk prices was in 2014. It is now 2022. Things are awesome. It's great. We've got tons of money in the milk check. We also have really high expenses. So we really have to budget to make sure we're using that money appropriately. But if we are using really high milk prices for our budget and expecting that to last for the next 5 years, we know that that is very unlikely. We know that prices are going to come back. That's just how our market works. And we need to make sure that when we are budgeting, if we are doing a long-term budget for 3 years down the road, we need to bring it back to our historical norms. And then again, like I said, with being realistic, we also know that if we're in a particularly challenging time, that those times don't last either. And we need to know that we will get on the other side of it. What do we need to do now to make sure that we can get to that other side? So when we're talking about management changes based on our budget, we want to look at what are things that we can do that will fit into both the good times and the bad. Someone once told me that if it's a good decision in a good time, it's a decision in a bad time. And if it's a good decision in a bad time, it's a good decision in a good time. We don't want our management practices to shift based on the economic situation. We want to make sound economic decisions that are going to be profitable no matter what we're doing. All of these decisions should relate back to our goals. So as we think about what is driving this farm, what is driving our family to be on this farm, what are we ultimately working for as a farm business, that is really going to help shape some of these day-to-day financial management decisions. Because for me, we have a farm and there's a whole lot more to that than just sitting down, paying bills, getting the kids up to do chores, repairing equipment, every little day-to-day task. We have reasons that we're here. We have reasons to be in the farming community. And if you've ever sat down and created a mission and a vision statement, it all should reflect back on what values that you have and what are the reasons for you to be here doing what you're doing. So I love this Brene Brown quote because I think it really does bring you back to why are you here? And as we talk about financial stress and how to manage that, I think keeping that perspective is really important because all of these little things that we're doing, having the budget, trying to manage costs, it all comes back to that why. Why do you do this? So when we think about values for farm finances, we look at why do we do this and where are we heading? What are the goals that we have for our business? What are the values that shape our farm family within business? How do our values support the decisions that we make and those short and long-term goals? Vision and mission statements that we've made as we've developed our plan. And those are things that should grow and change, evolve over time. Again, they're not something we do and put in a drawer because we had to take it for a class that we took at. They're things that should be driving our day-to-day mission. As we work on these decisions, as we work on our budgets, we have to remember that the plan that we make is always going to change. So keeping this in mind, we use this decision, make a plan, we implement that plan, we evaluate how that plan is going. Great. Hey, maybe we can tweak a little bit, or maybe we need to readjust. Make those adjustments and we go back to the start again and we start making those plans again. We make adjustments to that plan, we implement again. It's a continuous circle in how we manage our farm business. And we evaluate that based on the goals that we have for the business. So I'm going to take a quick pause here and we're going to get into some things that we can do from a risk management perspective. But I wanted to share with you because I was listening with a podcast here on my run this weekend to a wellness expert who talked about taking breath breaks. And I thought this was a really great opportunity to kind of take a little bit of a break. I don't see any questions in the chat. But she was talking about how when we're on a farm, well, she wasn't talking about being on a farm, but I interpret it that way. But she mentioned the concept of breath breaks during the day. And she said, when you're doing an activity, something that you do frequently during the day. So my examples would be, anytime you're washing your hands, if you're getting in and out of a tractor, if you're going back and forth to the greenhouse or moving your kids around, going back and forth to the calf barn, whatever it might be. Anytime you're doing something that requires kind of a rote activity, stop and take 3 deep. And because of the stimuli that we have in our day, the amount of things that are competing for attention, having an act that reminds us to breathe deeply gives us that resetting of our nervous system a little bit and just helps to calm us down. It's a quick activity and it just gives us that quick reminder to calm down. And I thought that was a really great practice that we could easily adapt to the farming community because it's something that we do a lot, just go, go, go continuously all day. So we're just going to take a quick break, take 3 deep breaths. And we'll move in. I highly recommend that for you. If you have anything that you do, let's say you are make a new cup of coffee during the day, go ahead, take 3 deep breaths while you wait for it to, or while you're pouring your coffee. And I think it'll help us all relax a little bit. So here we're going to talk a little bit about risk management. I love risk management on the farm because I think it's an underutilized tool amongst most farm businesses. It has not always been available for all commodities from a government risk management program standpoint, but the concept of risk management is something that all farms can employ. Depending on their situation, they can use different aspects of it. So this is a chart from Purdue that essentially shows you how your choices are impacted based on the risk level that you see. So I've got to look over to my side here so I can see it in a little bit bigger of a screen here. You identify risk on the farm, and that could be any kind of risk, but we're going to talk financial risk in this case. So let's look at the risk falling prices for your products. And you see that risk is out there because we don't have any of our prices locked in. We don't know what we're going to be selling our crop for here in the fall. And there's several choices that we can make here. We can avoid that risk. We can just ignore it, hope it doesn't happen, see what goes on there. And there's a big probability that the prices are not going to be where they're at today. They're going to change in some way. And that could have a big consequence on us. So now they could go up, that'd be a large consequence, but it'd be a very positive one. Prices could go down, that's a large consequence. And it would probably have a pretty negative effect on us from where we stand today. It might not hurt us overall if prices are high today and go down a lot. We might still be okay, but it is going to be a big shift from the status quo of where we're at today. We could try to reduce some of our risks. And that would be by just saying, you know, we are going to try and put some active pieces in place. We can contract some things. We can try and cut some of that risk down by selling some of our crop today, and that cuts out some of that risk. We can transfer or share some of our risk to other people. So that might be employing some hedging accounts or some options. That can be buying insurance. And we can also retain some of our risk. We can self-insure, and I see this a lot on farms. If you have very strong liquidity, if you know that your farm can absorb a price drop significantly and you'll be fine, then you can self-insure to some extent, because the costs of doing that are the costs of the price drop. You don't have to pay any insurance premiums. You don't have to pay anyone to take that risk on for you. And hey, you might take a loss, but the next year you might get the gain of a big price increase. And so you can hold on to that risk and understand that you're self-insuring in that sense too. And I see that a lot on farms as well. Guess that most farms do not have the ability to self-insure year after year, time after time. It's not a foolproof strategy unless you have an outside source of cash that can help and come in and cover some of that loss. So why do we use risk management? What are the benefits of doing this? It does protect your investment, that investment in that crop that you have out today, that investment in those inputs, those inventories. It protects some of that, and it helps to preserve that equity that we talked about earlier. It protects against some of these unforeseen consequences like yield loss, some revenue loss, quality losses from some of the things that we can't always control, like weather-related events in particular. And in the case of livestock operations, if we are trying to protect our feed yields for our livestock operations, having risk management in place will protect our feed loss. So if we have a major drought or we have a super wet year and our inventory, then if we have insurance on those crops, we are able to take our insurance indemnity payments and go out and buy the feed for that livestock. We can also use risk management to forward contract and allow ourselves to lock in prices. And this is one of my favorite things that we can do, is look at if we're locking in prices on our crops, then we know what that bottom line has to be. We know where where we're able to take losses at, and then we can use some insurance on the other side to make sure that we are going to be protected there, and we can essentially lock in that profit. And then through all of this, the ultimate goal of using risk management is to ensure that we are meeting our business goals, that we're logging in some sort of profit year after year, and we are taking some of that uncertainty out of our business, because we know that agriculture has a tremendous amount of uncertainty in it, and we can take some of that out. We're looking at risk management for livestock in particular, and this is getting more into that crop insurance side of things. You've got options like total livestock insurance. You can look at the amount of intended acres that you have by the crop that are going to livestock. You can look at feed inventories and the feed needs that you have and ensure that on the livestock side. So if you're looking at crop insurance and thinking, I've got livestock, I'm primarily a livestock operation, whether that's sheep, beef, what have you, you can lock in crop insurance based on these different aspects. You can look at production records. That's how crop insurance is going to take your insurance into account. It'll look at yield variation. It'll also look at prevented planting, if you did any prevented planting in the year, and then it'll also look at your input cost per crop. On the grain side, it looks at the intended acres that you plan to plant by the crop. It looks at your marketing strategies and the percent that you have forward contracted. It looks at your production records. And again, it looks at those same yield variation, prevented planting, and the input costs that you have. These are the crops that you can insure in the Northeast. We got a whole host of them on the list here. And everything that's in green are policies that we have here at Farm Credit. So specifically that a client of with Farm Credit crop insurance has with us today. So those are but that doesn't mean that you can't call us up and say, hey, I would like Farm Credit crop insurance to come and get me some cranberry bog. Now this is Farm Credit here in Pennsylvania. So I'm sure there's other farm credits that are covering the rest of these, but this is in particular to us at Farm Credit. So if you are growing any one of these crops and you're interested in crop insurance, check out what is available in your local area. You can also see that there are crop insurance programs for whole farm revenue, the Dairy Revenue Protection Program, and then some other options along there as well. If you're interested in finding a crop insurance agent, you can definitely check us out here at Farm Credit. You can call us directly. You can go onto our website, currently at agchoice.com, or and they can set you up with a Farm Credit representative crop insurance agent that is working in your area. If you are just checking it out and want to find a general crop insurance agent, the nice thing about crop insurance is that all the products, all the premiums are subsidized and standardized by the USDA Risk Management Agency, across all crop insurance providers. So you're going to get the same thing product-wise, no matter where you go. The difference is in the people that you are working with. You can find an agent in general by going to rma.usda agent locator. I think the easiest way to find it is just Google crop insurance agent locator. That's the best way you're going to find it. The website itself is a little bit long if you're trying to copy it over from this slide. And we're going to take a little bit of time for questions as well. And I do want to end on a couple of slides here. As I was thinking about this topic, I saw a couple of posts from, again, a few people that I follow related to businesses. And I really felt that this spoke to me from an agricultural perspective, because I feel like in farming, we equate the terms forever with success. And the idea that we have to be doing this one thing forever. And if you look at, take for example, if you open a coffee shop, you run it for a while, things get expensive, you get stressed out, and you just don't want to do it anymore, and you want to do something else. You could look at it as a failed business because you did not have that coffee shop forever. We look at that as the only acceptable way to win in farming is if you keep farming forever. And I think we have to take a different mindset in some cases, and it's going to be different for everyone. Everyone's personal journey is going to be different, but something can be good and it can also end, and that's okay, and that's still good, and it was still a good time, and it was still a success. And it's sad that we ended it, and that's okay too, but there's no point in saying that it was less than. It's not automatically less than because we didn't do it forever. And I think that's really important to keep in mind as we are working through all of the financial stresses that we have, as we're evaluating the farm from a financial perspective, that we need to keep our values in mind. We need to keep the goals of why we are doing what we are doing in mind, because that is ultimately what is driving this. And we need to follow those goals and follow our values in that farming business, into whatever enterprise that might be, and whatever is best for our farms, ourselves, our families, the people that are meaningful around us. And we need to make the right decisions for our farm finances that keep our stress, ourselves, our mental well-being intact as well. So as we're looking at that, what does success mean to you? What drives your profitability? Can you control your controllable? Keep that positive attitude to the best of your ability. Reach out to people that can help you with that. Keep those people around you that you know are valuable to you. Balance all of the things that we find are drivers of success in the farming world, whether that's volume, efficiency, capacity, those industry skills. All of those go into making a farm profitable, but we need to bring it back to those goals, those values, and what is important to you. So I'm here. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to us, to me, to the rest of our consulting team at Farm Credit. And if you have questions, we can definitely talk through those. You can reach out to me directly if you need to. My contact information is here on the screen. I'm happy to talk through anything anytime. You also have the folks at FarmLink there to answer your questions as well. So I really appreciate and want to thank Michelle and Darlene at Pennsylvania FarmLink for inviting me here today. I hope you all get working on those budgets. It is June. You should have mid-year budgets to review right now. So you should be comparing what you did at the beginning of the year to how it's going here with 6 months in, and making adjustments, because we know that your budget is not going to look the same 6 months in. So if you do have questions, or you do have a budget and you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing, I need some help, give us a call. We can help with that as well. So I want to thank you all again for sticking with me today and appreciate all of your time.